Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime, and it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? A drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard. Learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude.
Welcome. Today, I'm speaking with Rayna Neises. Rayna understands the joys and challenges that come from a season of caring. She helped care for both of her parents during their separate battles with Alzheimer's over a 30-year span. She can look back on those days now with no regrets, and she wishes the same for everyone caring for aging parents. Rayna is the author of No Regrets, Hope for Your Caregiving Season, creator of Content Magazine, an ICF certified coach, the host of a Season of Caring podcast, Positive Approach to Care, independent certified trainer and speaker who's passionate about offering encouragement, support, and resources for regret-free caring aimed at preventing family caregivers from aimlessly wandering through this important season of life. Rayna lives on a farm in southeast Kansas with her husband, Ron, and a small pack of adorable dogs. She's the baby of her family, but most would never guess that. She is a former teacher who enjoys crafts of all kinds, woman after my own heart, and spending time with her grandkids most of all. Welcome, Rayna. I'm so grateful to have a chance to talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we've been talking back and forth for a while. And I'm looking forward to this because I love how almost every guest that I talk to, we have something really pivotal in common. And in your case, it's caregiving. And I think that this is such an important subject. I think so many people are finding themselves, especially during the pandemic, in this situation, and they really don't know what to do. So your insight's going to be really important today.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to talking to you about it.
So I always like to start at the beginning, and I like to take a look at the thread of how God is working in our lives from that time all the way up into what he has us doing now, because I think it's so wonderful to see how God is working in every little part of our story. I think he's just the best storyteller that there is. Would you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. So I was born in Independence, Missouri. I have one older sister, just 2.5 years older. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom when she became a mom. Before that, she was a career lady. My mom and dad were married at 17 and 18, but didn't have their first child till 36. So, wow. Different lifestyle that they kind of, once they became parents, they just embraced it all the way. So it was a real blessing. We grew up near family, but we did spend 3 years in Slidell, Louisiana, which was away from my mom and dad's families. And just for 3 years, because my parents did not like that. So I had lots of aunts and uncles around and lots of good family time. So.
That's awesome. You had told me during our pre-recording call that y'all went to church together up until when you were about 6 years old. Why did that change?
Yeah, so it's funny when I look back as an adult, I would love to know the actual why, but that was that period of time. So we lived in Louisiana, and when I was 6 is when we moved back to Independence. And when we lived in Louisiana, we went to church together as a family. But for some reason, when we moved back to Independence, my parents decided to have my sister. So I was just a first grader. She was a fourth grader, had us go and just kind of try out 3 different churches. And really, it was just the Sunday school. And so we went to these 3 different churches. My parents dropped us off, picked us up after Sunday school, and then ask us which one we liked better. And
Wow.
that's how we chose which church we went to. And so my sister and I continue to go to Sunday school together until she hit middle school. So just a couple of years. And then she decided she didn't want to go. And so it was just me from that point on. And again, every Sunday we had a big family meal. And then one of them took me and dropped me off for an hour and then came back and picked me up. And so that was definitely really a different, unusual. um,
Yeah. Yeah, that is very different. And do you have any idea why your sister stopped going?
she just said, I think it was social, to be honest with
Yeah,
you. I think middle school is a tough age.
it is.
And she just didn't have friends there necessarily, I don't think. And it just, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really awesome that you got the opportunity to go. What did church feel like for you? Why did you stay?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I just really enjoyed it. Now, when I was in third grade, Easter Sunday, I remember very clearly just praying and realizing, having a shift happen from, oh, Jesus died for our sins, for everybody, kind of that big blanket that, is
Hmm.
there. I went from that understanding to, oh, he died for me.
Yeah.
And so that Sunday, I just really remember in Sunday school praying and just telling him how sorry I was for my sins and that he had to die for me. And that became very personal at that point. And so it was just something that I always, when I look back on my childhood, really in my life, I just feel like God's just had his hand on me, just really wooing me and drawing me to him from a
Yeah.
very young age.
Yeah,
So.
I can hear that. And honestly, the mere fact that you still were taken to church, even though your parents didn't go, is proof of that. And God's
Mhm.
favor and his direction can happen no matter who we're dealing with or what we're dealing with. I love hearing in all the different stories of people's lives, how he peppers in these different people and these different ways to surround us with the body of Christ and give us opportunity to know him.
It is so amazing how relationship is so individual and different, and
Hmm.
he's able to do that. He meets you where you need to be. So,
Yeah, he's so good that way. Now, you had a best friend at that time. You told me that she moved away, which must have
mhm.
been difficult. You saved your money to visit her, which I think is just really incredible. That's not how every little child would react. um, so very practical, very practical. So you saved your money to visit her. What happened when you did?
So she lived right next door to me, and she and I felt like she was the one who just got me.
Yeah.
And so we were so looking forward to hitting middle school together. So we had been going to school together. It was the end of sixth grade, and we were just, it was junior high back then, and we were so excited about going to junior high together. And that's when her dad dropped the bomb that he was getting transferred. And so here we were so looking forward to this junior high, and then it was like I had to do it alone. And
Mm,
so that was so hard. I remember I was just so disappointed to not have her there and to have to kind of try to find new relationships. And so I did. I saved my babysitting money, and my parents let me fly from Kansas City to Ohio to visit Kathy that summer after she had moved. And it
well,
was
even that's kind of
yeah,
miraculous. Your parents
it
let you
is.
go. Yeah.
I look back and think, gosh, I can't believe they let me do that. But I mean, they, the people on the plane knew I was flying by myself. But yeah, I did it. I mean, I did it all by myself. So, um, when I went to visit her, she had connected in church to a really fantastic youth group as a seventh grader. And so she had been to youth camp. And the week after, I think, is when I went to visit her. And at that point was this first introduction to somebody who was reading the Bible every day and was looking at, really being intentional with her discipleship. And
Hmm.
so as I spent the week with her and she was reading, then I was reading, and it really just got me excited about taking ownership of my relationship with the Lord and not just relying on other people to teach me about him, but for me to start
Hmm.
reading and learning on my own, being exposed to Christian magazines and Christian music was kind of coming up at that point. And so those were all factors that really, that one visit started to kind of spawn within me. Oh, I can do this. I
Yeah.
can be in charge of my own growth, maybe. Again, I'm 12, so it was just a new concept.
Yeah, absolutely. But honestly, that does make all the difference. First, you have to
Mhm.
go from these, very religious spirit traditions of men to actual relationship. It's personal. You died for me. You did that. And then you have to get into the word, because as the word kind of shines in your heart and washes over you, is how we transform and really become Christians. So how did reading your Bible affect you?
I think it started just that prompt within me to really see him even more personal. I mean, I knew that he had died for my sins, but it was like this, he lived, and just really learning about what his life was like and how
Hmm.
he lived while he was here and how he left me directions and how I needed to live, how I needed to treat people. I just started to really come to life within
Yeah.
me.
As I'm listening to the bird's eye view of your story, it's not really, I don't think, any kind of coincidence that it was during a time where you didn't have your best friend right there,
Yes.
that you weren't alone. So you had this need for connection in a deep way, and then you got to connect to Jesus in that way, reading the Bible.
And that made such a huge difference. I mean, he really did become my best friend. And
Hmm.
so when I look back on that, then when I was 16, which was really a pretty short period of time between those two, I had a connection to my youth group. I had, that support, but at the same time, the Lord was my best friend. So when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and I was only 16 years old, there was nothing easy about it, but the
Hmm.
Lord's who I went to. He's the one I cried with. He's the one that I fellowshipped with in that suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I find also that the timing of this is just so purposeful from God. Now,
Mm.
you could have said no. You could have not chosen to read the Bible when you got home. You could have not saved your money to go see your friend. You could have not done a lot of things, but God always gives us these chances to make choices. They're opportunities really to obey. And as we do that, we get to know him more and more. I think we were so blessed to have him to go to during that time. I can't even imagine. I deal with caring for my parents. My mom has some memory loss, but going through that with both of your parents, as we'll talk about, is just astronomical. I can't, I don't think that normally happens to people. So when your mom was starting to have memory loss, your sister was off at college, and you had said that you noticed your mom was beginning to struggle. How was it that she got diagnosed? Did she go to the doctor? How was your dad in all of this? What was that time like?
Yeah, so there was some struggles before Robin went off to college but I had her there. And so the struggles were things like we would come home. My sister was obviously driving. I wasn't quite driving at that point, and my sister would come home and it would be like, "Where have you been?"
Hmm.
Well, we've been, playing softball, or we went to get a burger with the girls after softball practice. We told you. Well,
Hmm.
no, you didn't, and so this tension was rising between us and my mom. And it was this, I don't understand why, why she's not remembering. But at the
Hmm.
same time, Robin and I could affirm that in each other. Well, you told her, I told her, she knew where we were. I don't know why she's doing this. And I can really, really stands out to me. There was one day when we came home and she was just distraught. She had no idea where we were. And she's like, "You did not tell me." And we were like, "Yeah, we did." And I remember her just yelling at us, "I don't know
Mm.
why you're trying to make me feel like I'm crazy."
Oh.
And I thought, "Oh my gosh, I just, I couldn't understand what was happening and why it was,
Hmm.
why she felt that way." But looking back now, it breaks my heart to think of how she had to have felt so ganged up on
Yeah.
because she didn't remember. It wasn't it was, she couldn't do anything about it. So
Yeah.
then when Robin went off to college, it was just me and I wasn't driving yet. And so mom was the bride. I played all three sports in high school. And so there would be times that she was late. There would be times that, she'd be early and tell me I told her the wrong time. So there was
Hmm.
just struggle in that. I was a good kid. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I was getting in trouble. And and
Yeah.
she would tell my dad, and my dad would be, would get on to me. I'd be like, I didn't feel like I could say, well, that's not true, because that's calling my mom a liar. And I couldn't do that. But I just couldn't really wrap my mind around what was happening. So eventually, with Robin being gone, it definitely got more challenging.
Hmm. I
And
can hear that.
my dad did say to me later, Rayna, you're the one who said something has to be wrong.
Hmm.
And so he, began to realize that mom was struggling more. And he asked her, and she said, "Yeah, I think I might be having some trouble." So they did go to the general practitioner, who referred him to a specialist, and she went through testing, and at that point, she was only 52 years old, almost 53, when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Wow. As you were talking, I could really hear. Now, I know this isn't what was happening, but the trauma sounds very similar. Your mom didn't know what she was doing, but it must have felt very much like when someone's gaslighting you, because they're saying no, I didn't, and then you're feeling crazy, but you at least had your sister to kind of confirm what was going on, but your mom was also having trauma on the other end. So all
Yes.
around, it just sounds like just such a heavy, confusing, painful time for everyone. I can't even imagine what that was like for you. And it had to be really difficult. I would imagine it's difficult for anyone who's having trouble with their memory to even admit it.
Yeah, and I think my mom had seen, Alzheimer's it wasn't talked about a lot. There wasn't a lot of information just in the general public. There's a lot more available today, and people talk about it a lot more today. I think back then it was just crazy
Yeah.
old people, kind of thing. But my mom
Hmm.
had seen a movie where, the lady was a professor, and in her 2 hours time span, she went from being a professor to dying, not knowing anyone, fetal state, the worst case scenario. And
Hmm.
so I think there was a lot of fear for her
Yeah.
in that as well, because I know something's wrong with me, but yet I don't want it to be that, and then it was. So
Hmm. Yeah. You had told me during that time, though, you really felt like Jesus was right there with you. I'm so glad that you were able to be aware of his presence like that.
yeah, I'm always so thankful for that, of just really feeling like when nothing made sense, and he was the one that I cried to. And honestly, even when I tried to find other people that could be sympathetic, they just couldn't relate. I mean, I
Yeah.
was 16, 17 years old. Girls are worried about what they're wearing on their date and what this boy said about them. And my
Yeah.
mom's dying,
Yeah.
I mean, the level of difficulty of trying to process it all and just
Yeah.
accept it, for what it was as much as I could. The Lord just really was the one that I turned to. And I was so thankful that I had that relationship, and that was the natural place to go.
Yeah, I can relate to that because there are struggles in caring for my parents. And it's not really something I can discuss with my kids because I don't want to color their idea or their relationship with their grandparents any. Jesus is where I go also. And in your case, going to your dad wasn't appropriate either because he was having his own struggles. So I'm so glad that you did have him to go to. I know I'm so grateful to have him to go to when I'm struggling with things. It's not easy to watch people change from who you've always known them to be.
Yeah, it is definitely a challenge, and I think even more for me as an adolescent, because you kind of don't have eyes to see anybody else as a person, especially not an adult.
Yeah.
My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She just did everything that needed to be done. Everything we needed was right there. She
Yeah.
was just the always steady, always there person. So for her to not be was difficult to even wrap my mind around, much less to realize what she must have been going through. So.
Yeah. What did it seem to be like for your dad? I mean, is he trying to be stoic about it? How did he react?
Yeah, I would say he was probably pretty stoic. My parents were always behind closed door conversation people. I never
Hmm.
saw them fight. I never saw a lot of emotion. There was warmth and affection, but not negative emotions. So he never really talked about it. And
Yeah.
we didn't really talk about it, especially while mom was still alive.
Yeah. But we had talked about when it was finally time for you to go to college, because at this point, you were very much a part of your mom's daily care. So I think what you were feeling at the time was you couldn't leave, right? You couldn't go far away, but you had a conversation with your father. What was the advice that he gave you?
Yeah, so my senior English paper was on Alzheimer's.
Mm,
And so that was really how I learned anything about the disease. And because of my mom's age, we expected that she would fall within early onset. So her lifespan should be 4 to 6 years. Now, by the time I'm going off to college, we're almost 3 years into her diagnosis. And I'm
mm,
thinking, I won't have her much longer.
yeah.
And so there was a college I was looking at about 40, 45 minutes from home. It was okay. It would be my second choice, to be honest with you. But at the time, the one I really wanted to go to was almost 3 hours away. And that's where my heart really was. But I was leaning towards going closer to home so that I could be there with my dad and be there with my mom. And my dad was wise enough to see that and to realize that I was making that decision because of location, not because of what I really wanted. And
Hmm.
he just said, he asked me point blank, what do you really want to do? And I said, well, I really want to play volleyball at Southwest Baptist University. And he said, then that's what you're going to do. And I said, but mom. And he said, no, 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 no. He said, Rayna, your mom, I've got your mom.
Mm.
We will be fine. You need to go live your life and do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's powerful. What a great dad to have given you the freedom
Yeah.
so that you could go. Yeah, that's a
Yeah, and
good
the
dad.
wisdom to know that's what I was doing because I don't know that I verbalized it at all. I just
Hmm.
remember kind of being surprised that he realized and he really wanted to hear, what do you really want?
Yeah.
So I was really thankful for that.
Well, that's one of the reasons I had asked whether he was verbal or pretty stoic, because just because he didn't say anything didn't mean he wasn't really picking up on what was going on.
Hmm.
Yeah.
He had his own stuff for sure. I mean, they were
Yeah.
young and it was a traumatic, change in their projection. We were getting out of the house and they had plans. And here
Hmm.
they were at a place where their lives were going to change. And those plans
Yeah.
weren't going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the entire trajectory of their lives changed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you eventually met your husband, and you started a coaching business for women. Can you tell us a little about that and tell us a little about him?
Yeah. So actually my dad and I were in business together. We owned a Sylvan Learning Center and it
Hmm.
was about 90 miles away from where my husband farms. And so he and I met on a blind date kind of thing through a dating service. And we just instantly had a connection. We were just really quick to be able to talk about those things that were most important to us and really just saw that this could go somewhere. But we knew we had some pretty big challenges.
Hmm.
My husband is Catholic and I'm Baptist. He had 4 children. And we lived 90 miles apart and both owned a business. And so we're like, okay, I mean, the end of our first date, that's kind of how I summarized the challenges. I said, I'm really interested in getting to know you better, but this is what I see our challenges are. So when I married the farmer and moved to the farm, we ended up closing my business and
Hmm.
I started doing the coach training and looking at becoming a coach for Christian women who were in transition. I've lived through a lot of different transitions in my life. So I loved being able to do that. I was teaching part-time at the Catholic school here using my reading specialist degree while I was working on my coach training. And so he farms about 3,000 acres. He's a third generation farmer. and his middle son, our son, farms with him as well. And so he's a very busy man, but a really hard worker and just all heart.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And what a nice place to be on a farm. That
It is.
sounds like a peaceful place to be.
It's funny because my sister to this day still laughs and says, I just can't believe that you live on a farm, because we grew up in a suburb of Kansas City. So, it was
Yes.
definitely not the most likely place for me to land, but I love it. I love the peace and quiet of it and just the life of dependence on the Lord. I mean, there is no one who sees that dependence more than a farmer. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say absolutely. In that case, I think that's it's something that's just seems to be a theme in your life. He just keeps putting you in places and around people that need to depend on him. But the great thing about that is the stronger your faith, the easier you're able to really rely on him.
mhm.
The better you're able to convey that to the people that you're coaching and mentoring and working with.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's where being able to be honest and transparent about the struggles of life, because we all
Hmm.
have them, but we have a tendency to look at other people's lives and not see their struggles. Um,
Hmm.
but I think, being vulnerable about your struggles helps other people to see, that life is full of good and bad. And just because you're in a season or a point where there's a lot of struggle doesn't mean there isn't other times coming that there won't be as much. So.
Yeah, and even in the times of greatest struggle, we can look around and still find good things.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to be in some kind of community connected to at least a few people, so that on the times where it's difficult for you, someone else can help you look and see the good things.
hmm Yeah, my tagline for my women's coaching business was "Hope when life stinks."
That sounds good. Very down to earth. Now, unfortunately, your father then received an Alzheimer's diagnosis as well. So how did that go? How did you care for them?
Yeah, so my mom lived 12 years with the disease, and she passed away. And 7 years later was when my dad was diagnosed. And my dad and I were in business at that time. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in my office, and he called me during the day, and that wasn't real typical. And I'm like, "What's up?" And he said, "I'm kind of worried." And I said, "Oh, what's going on?" And he said, I'm worried about my memory.
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, Dad, you don't need to worry about it." I said, sadly, though my parents were older when I was born, all of my grandparents had passed away before I was even born.
Oh,
So
wow.
we didn't have genes that lived a long time. And I just said to him, I said, Dad, we don't even know what it looks like to live to be old. So
Yeah.
he was in his early 70s at that point, and I said, I just go to the doctor. We're just more sensitive to memory loss than most people. Just go to the doctor and let them check you out, and I'm sure it'll be fine. It wasn't. And so I was thankful that he called and talked to me about it. And it was devastating for him to have a diagnosis of memory loss. He started off with mild cognitive impairment, and then about 50% of the people who have mild cognitive impairment progress to Alzheimer's. And he progressed to that point. Dad lived 14 years with Alzheimer's, and he was a very active, energetic individual. He retired early from his job as an accountant, as the chief financial officer of Folgers Coffee plant in Kansas City, and
Hmm.
cared for my mom in the home until she passed away. And so, as he had done that, he had also gotten plugged into some senior softball leagues, and he had actually played for the Brooklyn Dodgers when he was younger. And so, softball was a big piece of his self care. Honestly, he played 3 times a week, and I would go and stay with mom while he would go and play. And once she passed away, he was able to play and travel with the teams, and really just participate in a lot of things. So he continued to do that until, um, you know, we actually reached a point where the doctor said, we need to look at stop having him drive within the next 6 months. And
Hmm.
his sister was living in the home with him, so she was keeping an eye on things if there was any struggles that he had, and definitely he was progressing. But we hired help to make sure he could keep going and doing the activities he wanted to do to keep him physically active. And about 5 years into his diagnosis, 6 years, he developed melanoma and
Mm.
had to have surgery to have that cancer removed. And that was a real turning point for him. He went from being able to care for his own physical needs, showering and shaving and all of those things every day, to the anesthesia really causing a lot of memory issues. He also developed MRSA in the womb. And so we
Ah,
had a really tough couple of months there, and we weren't real sure how he was going to bounce back mentally. Eventually he did, but my aunt was just maxed out. It was way too much for her. And so we reached a point as a family where we were trying to figure out, what do we do with dad? And I'm on the farm 220 miles away from dad, and he's still in his home. My sister's about 3 miles from him. And so the conversation started, what do we do? And we looked at memory care units, and I couldn't even imagine, honestly. I went and visited, and I would just leave in tears. And
yeah.
we visited one of the locations over Christmas break while my husband and I were up there, and I came home and I was crying, and my husband just said, what's going on? And I said, I just cannot imagine my dad living there. And he looked at me and said, then don't. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said,
Hmm.
if you need to come here and live with your dad and take care of your dad, then that's what you need to do.
Wow, that's awesome. Because it's very traumatic. They're lockdown units, and
Yeah,
it's for their own safety, but
it
still,
is.
that is the thought of placing someone you love in a place like that is really difficult.
And for us, dad was still going to volleyball 3 times a week and lifting weights 3 times a week. So
Hmm.
imagining him living in this small lockdown place where they
Yeah,
thought exercise was chair yoga, you know, he just
yeah,
didn't fit. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
wasn't a good fit. So
yeah. Now, you and your sister, you had said, had some different ideas of what would be best. So, what was it that you finally came up with?
So again, Robin really just felt like the best place for him was a memory care unit because of the socialization and that he would be safe.
Hmm.
I just absolutely could not imagine that. So when my husband said, if you need to come here and live, I thought, okay, well, what does that look like? What choices are out here that I don't even know about? So I started making some phone calls and kind of looking at what could it look like for dad to stay in his home.
Hmm.
And in order for us to spend about the same amount of money as we would if we were putting him in a memory care unit, I would need to be there at least 3 days a week. And so I kind of started putting together this plan saying, okay, I'll come up on Thursday after I'm finished teaching. And because I was working 4 half days teaching still. And I thought, well, if I drive up after that and stay through Sunday, and then we bring in help, to keep him at home, then maybe we can, that would be about the same thing financially. So I went to my sister and I said, okay, will you let me? Because she was the DPOA. She's the final person who made that decision. I said, would you let me try this?
Hmm.
Instead of going, doing a memory care unit, would you let me come and then bring other people in? And she's like, well, I hadn't thought of that. And she said, well, I could come 2 nights a week. She had elementary age kids. So she's like, I could, put them to bed and then spend the night with dad and get up and take off and go get the kids to school. And then my dad's sister, who had been living with him, said, well, I could do 2 nights a week. We could cook dinner together and I could stay with them. And so from that, then we started putting together this plan where we had paid help who came in during the day. We had family that spent the night. We used a day stay program where dad was able to go to a facility and be able to have the socialization on the days that he didn't go with a caregiver to play ball and do those other things. So we kept him engaged in the things that he loved, but we also built this unit of people around him that we were able to keep him at home.
I love that plan. It's unity and collaboration and diversity and safety and health all kind of together. Every piece had to be there for it to
It did.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't too much on any one piece. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was quite the plan. And at times things, fell apart and we'd have to try, okay, we need new caregivers or we need to try something different. Or
Yeah.
dad progressed and, he wasn't able to play volleyball anymore. So we added one more day to the day stay. So it was real fluid at times, but it was so amazing to be able to have that teamwork and to really have each person have the say of what works for them and where they
Hmm.
are,
Yeah.
because that changed as well. My aunt got to a point that she's like, I can't, I just can't do this anymore. And it's like, okay, let's, what's the next plan? So I love how we were able to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the other thing that keeps sticking with me is that in the beginning, when you were talking about Alzheimer's, you were saying that typically, you thought your mom was going to have 6 years, and your mom had
Mhm.
12, and your dad had 14. That's amazing.
Mhm.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, my opinion, is that we were just so in tune with them.
Hmm.
My dad caught things. My mom was nonverbal for 8 years of the 12,
Wow.
literally didn't talk anything but gibberish. So to be able to know her well enough to know when she wasn't well,
Hmm.
one of the things that can happen is they can start not coughing.
Yeah.
And so she had pneumonia 3 times that my dad was the one who said to the doctor, she's not okay. And the doctor's like,
Hmm.
well, the symptoms. And she's like, no, she's not okay. And so because the doctor trusted my dad, we were able to get an x-ray and see the pneumonia and treat her. So I think just that hands-on individual, care really did keep them. My mantra was always with my dad, happy and healthy as long as possible. And
Yeah.
so we wanted both of those pieces in there, but I think it was easier to do that because we had the one-on-one.
Yeah, it's so important to have consistency in care, to have people that do understand and know someone. Prior to caring for my parents, when I used to work in elder care ministry, one of the times I was with somebody who was in a home and I was additional kind of coverage for them. And so I was in there every single day. Whereas the people that work there, they're rotating shifts, they're different CNAs, there's different nurses, some people are out sick, whatever. So there's no consistency. And sometimes they would miss things. And because I knew the person that I was with, I could say, hey, she has a UTI way before anybody else knew it, or hey, she's I think she's having a TIA, And
Mm-hmm.
so she was able to get just such better care.
Yes.
And I always say to people, even if you can't have somebody full time, if you could have someone part time consistently for at least 5 days a week in with them as supplemental care, if they're in somewhere, is going to make all the difference in the world. So, of course, with your own family, I know when my mom, she has some heart issues, and we actually do, when she gets up from her chair, she has to sing happy birthday to herself twice before she goes, so she doesn't go too fast. And we have some things in place, but I can still tell if I'm walking. I always walk kind of behind her, kind of ready.
Mhm.
And I can tell when her gait changes, and I'll say, Mom, are you feeling dizzy? And then she'll say yes. And I'll say, what are you supposed to do? Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to turn and sit down because she has a walker
Yeah.
with a seat. So, you kind of step in and advocate for places where you can.
Yeah, and it even as we brought in-home care in, and like you said, because of the schedule, he might see somebody every other day, or he might see, they were the same people. We were the same team of people, but the
Hmm.
amount of time they spent with him wasn't as long as I did. So
Hmm.
I'd come in on weekends and be like, okay, how long's this been going on? And it'd be like,
Hmm.
oh, I hadn't thought about that, And so
Yeah.
it just really, all of us played such an important role. And but that consistency, you can't replace it. So
Yeah. Yeah. It really is the key. Now, there was a woman at Day Stay where he went, that said to you and your sister that you guys should write a book. So how did that pan out?
yeah, so we ended up, dad passed away he had a blood clot in his leg, and he survived surgery and was able to go home after rehab. And just kind of, I felt like he just kind of decided he was tired enough, he was done. And so he was just home again about 9 days before he passed away.
Hmm.
And we were at the funeral, and the director of the day stay that he went to, which had all people with memory care impairment, she'd been doing it for years. She just came up and gave me a big hug and was just like, we're just going to miss your dad so much. He was such a neat guy. And she said, you and your sister need to write a book. And I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. Thanks. Why would you say that? And she said, well, the way that you guys cared for him, she said you just
Hmm.
always focused on who he was and
Hmm.
you made him, let him continue to be himself.
Hmm.
I was like, that's interesting. And so grief is what grief is, which is overwhelming and difficult. And I was surprised at how hard it was when he passed away. Um, but I had a couple other people just in conversation as I talked about, because I did travel for 4.5 years.
Yeah.
We were able to keep him in the home, and I was there the whole time, not every weekend towards the but every other weekend at least. And so people knew what I had done and then knew that he was gone. And people just say, you really need to tell your story. You really need to
Hmm.
share. And I thought, I mean, my lowest grade in school was English. It might have only been a B, but it still was always hard. And so I just thought, I don't even imagine I could write a book. So as the fog of grief was lifting and I was talking to the Lord about my coaching business and where we were going, the Lord just really laid on my heart that he wanted me to shift to really ministering to people who were in this season of caring for their aging parents.
Hmm.
And so as I started to embrace that, took a little bit to do that, but as I started looking at, okay, Lord, what does that look like? What do you want me to do? He said, I want you to share your story. And so that's what I did. I eventually found some coaches that helped me to be able to put our story in a book. And the name of the book is No Regrets, Hope for Your Caregiving Season.
I think it's awesome. The theme that I hear in the way that you cared for both of your parents. I think she was right. You respected and honored their identity, their unique personality, their talents, who they were as a person. And a lot of times, I don't know why it happens, but with children and older folks on both ends of the spectrum, people tend to not do that. They
Mhm.
tend to not really honor them and and see exactly who they are and kind of I don't know. I don't know why it happens. It makes me a little bit upset.
It
I
is
think,
upsetting. I agree with you.
yeah,
I
I'm
think
trying to say it in a nice way. But no, it makes me righteously angry, I think, because
Mhm.
even the Bible tells us that both of those the age groups are so important,
Yes.
and I don't know what it is about society that kind of dismisses them.
I think we have a tendency in the age that we are when our parents are aging is one of the busiest seasons of our life, especially for raising children. We have a career, we're raising our kids, life is really busy,
Hmm.
and we look at what's easy and fits into our world, and we don't stop and really consider their world.
Yeah.
And my message that I feel like the Lord's really laid on my heart is that you can honor them, respect them, give them a life that still has value and worth,
Hmm.
and still have your own life and honor me with your life as well.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I think everybody feels like it can only be one or the other.
That's true. And the thing that I've always found to be true is that when you're older, you can carry less and less on your plate that you can actually do well or that's
Yeah.
healthy for you to do anymore. So the caregiver's job is to help take the things off the plate that have become a hindrance or that are heavy or that are difficult, and to leave on the plate the things that bring joy and purpose, and happiness and sense of accomplishment. So there's still plenty of things that you can do. My mom has macular degeneration, but she knits all day long. Her muscle memory remembered when I sat down to work with her again. And so instead of just sitting around watching TV, or having a discussion, she's knitting the whole time, and it's so good for her mind, and it
Mhm.
makes her feel accomplished. She's created these tangible things. And now we take them and we give them to different churches to take when it's cold for the homeless.
Right.
I've sewn some together because she seems to make scarves. That's like her thing. So I've sewn some together into bigger blankets and things like that. And she's able to see, oh, another bag just went out.
Yes.
So things like that where, you know, doing bills and taking care of taxes and all those kinds of things, it's a lot. Writing out checks. So here, let me take that over for you. Dad, go do a puzzle, do something,
Right.
go do, he absolutely loves finding out about all of his ancestors. So go do ancestry, on the
Mm.
computer, whatever. So those types of things, just letting them have quality.
Yes.
Yeah. But there are things
Improvement.
there's
Yeah.
things they like to do that, that aren't dangerous that they can do. Great. Go ahead and do that. But, maybe cooking with hot pans and things like that that's not the best idea anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just easier to come in and just do it than it is to stop and consider, okay, you can
Yes.
still do this part. So even with my dad, late into his diagnosis, Dad, can you tear up the lettuce for our salads? Here,
Yeah.
I'll cut
Yes.
the tomatoes, you tear up the lettuce, or set the table. Again, just letting them have purpose of being
Hmm.
a part as much as they can. And when they can't anymore or they're not interested anymore, then you take that over. But I think sadly, I do think it's the hustle and bustle and just the mentality that we develop in that really busyness of life. We don't look at that. We just do it. And it then becomes depressing, to have
Yeah.
everything taken away from you. And I
Yeah.
think it does impact length of life, and definitely quality.
Absolutely. Another thing that's just so good is to sit down and just tell me about like your past. Tell me what was the stuff that happened when you were little. Tell me some of your history. What is it that's the best thing you ever did in your life? What did you love the most? Get those stories out. I love to record them.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful to do that. We did not do it early enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I would say to families is take pictures. I love that
Mhm.
your camera's on your phone these days,
Yeah.
because that's what you're going to have. And when I dig through our pictures and try to find pictures of my mom, there are very few because she was our picture taker. So there's lots of
Oh,
pictures of my sister and I, or my dad and me, but not mom.
yeah. Yeah.
And so it's different today because they're so much easier. But I take selfies with my grandkids. I'm in a lot of pictures, not because it's all about me, but because I want us to always have that common memory and to always be able to look back on that and see those things.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I love that. I think enjoying relational moments with people and celebrating that's so important. And because we should document it. I spent a lot of time in ministry for a while with some 20-year-old aged people, and they started calling me Mamarazzi because I always took pictures when we were all together. But then later on, they'd be like, "Oh, I'm so glad that you did this because we were
mhm.
too busy."
Yes.
So it's just like that mentality of, I want to savor it. I want to be able to look back and remember.
Hmm.
Yeah. Now you cared for both of your parents. And the experience, from what I can tell, is something that's going to be with you forever. I could
Hmm.
just hear you're such a kind and advocate spirit. Um, what was it like for you, though? I mean, honestly, what did it feel like to have both of them leave you so early, even before they passed away because of memory issues?
I would say that's one of the things when I look back on my mom's diagnosis, I'm so thankful that my relationship was close to the Lord because I prayed for a long time he would heal her.
Mm,
And I struggled with when for the longest time I never really heard anything. So I just continued to ask for healing for her. And I can
yeah.
remember when I had that affirmation in my heart that no, that's not the way this is going to go, Raina. I'm not healing her here. I'm
Hmm.
going to take her home and she'll be perfect when she's there. But here, this is her journey. And I would say it was probably 7 years into her diagnosis before I really had that knowledge that we're walking all the way through this.
Right.
So I can't say I was happy about it, but I began to accept this is his will.
Hmm.
And no matter what I thought of it, this is his will. And so I had the
Yeah.
opportunity to struggle with that a little bit and say, how can your will be ugly and mean? And, and you have those feelings.
Hmm.
I would say it was even harder when my dad was diagnosed because we had journeyed so hard with mom.
Yeah.
Um, and dad and I were close as adults. I knew what was coming. He knew what was coming even more than
Hmm.
I did because he lived with mom every day, in the end. Um, Whereas I came and went in support.
Yeah.
And so for me, I knew, I fed my mom for 8 years of her life. I took her to the bathroom. I showered her when he would let me. I did all of those physical, intimate things for her just because that's just what she needed. And it was my mom, and there was no other relationship. My dad, we had this whole different relationship. We had this adult relationship. We were in business together. It was,
Yeah.
he was my, he was my soft place to land forever in everything of life. And so to think of having to bathe and to wipe his bottom and do those things was just horrible.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me to be like, okay, Lord, this is your will. I mean, I
Hmm.
really was like, I sat in, this is just stinking not fair. And I
Yeah.
don't know how you could do this. How could you let this happen again? Why is this what's going to go on?
Hmm.
And so, I'm thankful that his early decline was slow because I was able to work through a lot of those emotions with the Lord and come to peace with, this is where we're going. You're in the middle of it. You have said, this is my life, and you always have good things for me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look for the good things even in the middle of him walking in poop and dragging it on the carpet or hitting me or cussing because he's confused and lost, and
Hmm.
all of the heart-wrenching things that happen through this disease.
Yeah.
I know, God, you are good, and I will look for your good.
Amen. And nobody promised us that doing God's will was going to be easy. I don't
That's
know why people think God's will is necessarily easy. It's normally hard.
Yeah. It's
But
not what we would
as
choose for ourselves.
no, it wouldn't be. But do you choose to be uncomfortable?
No.
Do we all love to change? Do we like to work on the hard stuff that nobody else knows about and that we kind of like, well, it only happens every now and then? No, that's the stuff that he cares about because he cares about our hearts and because he cares about us and loves us with a compassion. And then he wants to overflow that compassionate love out of us into the people around us in the world. So if we're all clogged up with stuff, he can't do that. So he has a plan. It's always good. And he uses even the difficult, broken, excruciating times for good if we let him.
Definitely. It's not, it doesn't feel good, but it doesn't mean it's not good.
Yes, yes. And it's always when you look back that you can
Yeah.
see. Always, but
Well,
that's
and
that's why.
I learned through my dad's illness that I don't have to look back to see the good. I can
Mhm.
find the good in the midst of it. And that was probably the shift that happened for me, was even in the hard, I could find the good. So, one of the things is my husband. I mean, what a huge blessing to
Mhm.
have someone who is so supportive. And every night at 11 o'clock, we were on the phone. It, no matter how hard it was to get dad to go to bed that night, I still had that good, right there. And the next
Yeah.
morning was a new day with new mercies, and
Yeah.
dad didn't remember that. So it was all okay. So it, even in the middle of the hard, I learned to look for the good.
Yeah, that's actually where I learned how to choose gratitude
Yeah.
was probably one of the worst times of my life because, there is always good around and it's a discipline, it's a process. You have to choose it. It's an
Mhm.
intentional thing. You can always choose not to see it. But here's something that I'm just seeing as you were talking, when you're talking about your husband, I wrote a little note here. It said, both of the main men in your life at the most important pivotal times told you go do what you have to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. And it's even more cherished for me because this is my second marriage.
Hmm.
And my first marriage wasn't anything like that.
Hmm.
So I know at even a deeper level what a blessing it is to have that constant support and that wisdom that can only come from the Lord,
Yeah.
in being able to put themselves second, um, for him to step back and say, your dad needs you now more than I do. Go do what you need to do. I mean, it's just beautiful.
I mean, that's agape love. That's biblical love. That's sacrificial, unconditional, selfless love.
Yep.
That's great.
Even if he does leave the dirty dishes in the sink instead of putting them in the dishwasher.
Okay. Now, you speak, you volunteer, you do a podcast, you lead support groups, you started a new digital magazine, you share your wisdom and experience with others every way that you can. If you could do, I have a thing I call a back pocket list. So it's these things that I know God's given me the idea because it's really good and it makes me excited and I want to do it, but I also know it's not quite time yet. Um, but I know that it's coming. Do you have anything like that? Like if you could do anything more right now, if it was the next thing that you're allowed to do on the list, do you know what that is?
So my first answer would have been no, but then what came to mind is I so desire to have a content caregivers group of women that I can just walk alongside.
Mm,
And Content Magazine is the beginning of that, of trying to share those stories and bring people together around the stories of caregiving and God in the middle of them. But
mm-hmm,
I would love to have a group of women that walk over a period of time together. I am blessed to lead a support group that I really enjoy. And we meet weekly, so it's like that. But I just know that there's just that opportunity for women to be able to support each other a little bit more. And
yeah.
so that's what I see is it's Content Caregiver Group. So
That's awesome. And as you were talking, I'm thinking there's only one of you, right?
yeah,
But the internet makes for lots of quick and easy travel to all
yeah,
kinds of far off places. So I'm sure there are plenty of people out there that need a group like that. So maybe eventually some of the people who are in some of these groups can then also lead some of these groups, and some of them can be online as well and really help a lot of people.
yeah. And actually, the support group that I lead every week, we are all over the country, from California to Pennsylvania. So,
Awesome.
that's one thing COVID's done, is brought us onto Zoom together, and so it's definitely opened doors, especially when you live on a farm.
Yeah.
There's not your neighbor's not necessarily the one who needs that support. So I've been really thankful for the internet and bringing people together who need it and need that reminder that there is hope even when life stinks.
Yeah. Well, when you were speaking, I was picturing it just continuing to multiply. Like the people who are in
Mhm.
that group are all going to lead groups who are going to then lead, almost like
Yeah,
disciple making. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask if there was anyone listening right now who's just finding themselves either about to enter or has just entered a caregiving season, what would be some advice that you would think would be good to give them?
My number one piece of advice is to do it with intention, with prayer and intention. Don't Caregiving is so easy to just fall into
Mm-hmm.
or to get sucked into with guilt and all the other things that people talk about. I was intentional when I stepped into taking care of my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that that meant I had to let go of things, that I had to find a way to be able to keep my marriage healthy, my relationships healthy, keep my business going. I had to make choices. And I think so many times when I talk to people who are just starting or even in the middle of it, they're doing it all themselves because they just added one more thing, one more
Yeah.
thing, one more
Yeah.
thing. And then that's where I see the resentment starts to grow, where they start to lose themselves and they lose their purpose. And I guess I did that earlier in my life when I was married in my first marriage. We had a really rough time of it. And there was a point in time which he left me. And at that point, I realized how enmeshed I was in his problems and in his issues. And the Lord just laid on my heart. He's like, Rayna, yes, I died for him. And yes, he's important, but I died for you.
Mm-hmm.
You have a purpose. You have a calling. And there's things I want to do with your life. And I think as caregivers, we can forget that. And we
Mm-hmm.
then begin to resent it and become angry about it. And so if we're intentional and if we're asking the Lord in each step of the way, what do I need to do and who can do this, all of those kinds of things, we don't find ourselves at that place. We find ourselves still a healthy individual person who's cherished and loved by God and knows it, at the same time as being able to serve and love somebody else who's cherished and loved by God, and not
Mm-hmm.
have to be either or.
I think that's such wise advice. Absolutely. You do. You have to really consider everything and then be intentional as to what is the next thing that you should do. And I think, again, it's that plate analogy. God, what should be on my plate
Yep.
along with this caregiving, and how much of the caregiving is on my plate? Now, in my case, I was able to move and make it 100% of the time. I was able to retire from my day job and be here. I'm also able to choose to get up at 4 a.m. and go to bed late so that I can do this podcast and other things for God. And I make it all work. But if I'm ever, caregiving always comes first. And if
Mhm.
I'm ever overwhelmed, that's why I pre-record things and I have things done weeks ahead, so that if I have a week or two where things don't go smoothly, that's okay. So, you find out, but if that's not your thing, I happen to be someone that's really good and really thrives on doing a lot. The more I share God, the more invigorated I feel. So it really actually helps me in my caregiving to be able to be reminded every week with these conversations how good God is, and that's where I turn, and that's my source. So for me, that all works. Somebody with a different personality, that might not be a good thing.
And you have to know that about yourself of what you
Yeah,
need. And
yeah,
that's why, again, if your parents need help mowing the lawn, that's probably not something that you need to do, to be honest
that's
with
right.
you.
That's right.
It's something anyone can do. And
Hmm.
so if you're choosing to spend time on the lawnmower instead of spending time with your mom,
Yeah.
and your time is limited, you're going to regret that eventually
Hmm. Yeah.
because your mom's only here for so long. So I just think really realizing that each of these choices of things that we take on, and I say the same thing about our plates, if we try to splash caregiving on top of everything else,
Hmm.
everybody's miserable.
Yeah.
We've got to make room. We've got to move things off and let them go. And we've got to choose what we put on our plate. And by making that an intentional choice, that's
Hmm.
how we avoid regrets, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all have different seasons. And
Yeah.
so you're entering a new season when you're entering into that. And so it's going to look different. It's going to feel different, just like the seasons outside.
And the season will not last forever. And if you're
Amen.
in the thick of caregiving, it often feels that way.
Yeah.
But when we lost my dad, it was a shock. And
Yeah.
we're caring for somebody that is 85 years old and it has a terminal illness, but it still was surprising. And what I wouldn't do for more time with my parents.
Yeah.
So, I think we all forget that there is going to be an end to this. Ultimately, we are walking them all the way home.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then after we do that, we still need to have a life to walk back into.
That's
And
right.
so you can pick up those activities again. You can find those hobbies again or whatever you had to let go of,
Hmm.
but you will never have this time with them again. So
Absolutely. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and it's an honor.
it is.
Now, I always end my podcast with this one last question. Anyone who listens knows it's my favorite. I just love the answers. It really tells a lot about the person how you answer this. So, if you could go back and give your younger self any advice, what would it be?
It's all going to be okay. All of these things will add up to equal exactly what God wants them to be.
Well, that is very good advice, too. You're a wise woman, Raina.
Thank you.
Well, I could talk to you for hours, but in light of everyone's time, we're going to end here. I want to thank you so much for joining us and for telling us about all of the things that you've learned. In the show notes, everyone, go and look. There'll be links to Rayna's book, her podcast, her social media, her website, all the good things that she's doing. And if you have any questions, that's a good place to start.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been wonderful to be able to be here and just share gratitude for all that God's done for us and be able to celebrate that with you and your listeners.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. You know, if you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.